Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest on the line.
Yes, indeed.
Congressman Khanna. Welcome.
Thank you. Big fan of the show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ro. You know, I'm glad that you're here, man, because you know you've spoken to me about this proposal for wealth generation and tech jobs for young Black Americans, and you sent it to I believe you sent it to VP Biden and Kamala Harris. But explain to the people what that is.
Well, it's very simple. Right now, the Black community is being left out of the main wealth generation. I mean, I represent Silicon Valley. Less than 3% of venture capital goes to Black or Latino entrepreneurs. They're less than 10% at Apple, Google, Facebook of the employees or executives. If you think about it, the Black community was not fully part of the Industrial Revolution. And now you have a digital revolution, which is driving most of the stock market, 90% of the gains. And you don't see Black folks getting the IPOs. You don't see them at the executive tables. You don't see them generating wealth. So my view is you want to deal with the racial wealth gap, we've got to have more funding for Black entrepreneurs. We've got to actually create boot camps. We've actually got to get at least 1 million Black young men and women in the digital economy.
How do we do that?
Well, I think it's very simple, very concrete. 4 things. First, let's create actual boot camps at HBCUs in partnership with the private sector to get folks the skills and jobs. It's not enough for an Apple or Google or something to write a check to the United Negro Scholarship Fund and think their job is done. You know, there are only 1/3 of computer science graduates or people with skills are actually getting jobs. They have to actually commit to hiring these people, not just giving some skills. And what often happens is the HBCUs or other schools, they don't have the access to get interviews. So they may be doing computer science stuff, but then they're not doing the whiteboard interviews and they're getting blocked out. So we had a partnership at Claflin with Zoom, where Zoom committed to not just funding the training, practical skills, but actually hiring folks afterwards. And I think we have to create these kind of boot camps that Opportunity Hub and others are doing across the country.
Changing the curriculum. We have to change the curriculum.
Claflin in South Carolina?
Claflin, South Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah, Claflin and Zoom. So, you know, what was happening is these HBCUs, they'd give all the academic stuff and then people would go to interview and there are all these whiteboard interviews and all these things and they'd never been exposed to it. So they wouldn't get the job.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's not going to create actual opportunity. So first, get people the actual practical skills and certification that's going to lead to a job. So the HBCU should partner with the private institutions, and these private companies have to commit to hiring. Second, I would say at least any big company that wants to have a big federal contract, Amazon, others, have them have a 10% Black and Latino workforce.
That's right.
You see that happen. Look at how quickly they'll actually hire people. Right now, they're not. You know, there's no incentive for them to do it. It's just lip service.
I think it should be more than 10%. It should reflect the population of Black people in this country. So 13 to 14% is what I say.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, let's do something. I mean, 13, 14% makes a lot of sense. And, you know, Jesse Jackson, who I admire, but he's been going to Silicon Valley for the past 15 years. And he gives the same speech about diversity and they put out some statistics, but it's not improving. I mean, we've got to have some real policy, and it can't just be left to the intentions of people in the Valley. Third thing go ahead, please.
And what about raising funds? Because you did talk about venture capitalists and how Black people are getting left out when it comes to that. So what can be done about that?
I think 2 things. First, let's look at the statistics. Less than 3%, $130 billion venture capital industry, less than 3% is going to Black or Latino entrepreneurs. So probably less than 1% to Black entrepreneurs. And when it comes to women, it's less than 0.03%. I think we need to do 2 things. One, we need actual targeted federal government matching funds where we're putting funds into Black-owned VCs. There are about 20 prominent Black-owned VCs. You know, if you give money to people with Black-owned funds, they're more likely to fund Black entrepreneurs. That's just the reality of it. But the Black funds, VC funds, are, you know, a very small fraction of the $130 billion. So have federal funds to match that. And secondly, incentivize the Harvards, the public pension funds to say, look, you get a different capital gains tax rate if you're going to invest that money with a Black-owned fund, so that you're incentivizing these huge people who control a lot of the capital to put the money in Black funds. I fundamentally believe if you give money to Black-run funds, you're going to get more Black entrepreneurs funded. I don't think you can rely on other funds finding the entrepreneurs or opportunities.
Yeah, you got to be intentional about it. You know what I mean? So you got to give the money to people who are going to be intentional about empowering other Black people. But I got a question, Ro. What's keeping Black people out of the digital revolution? We're the consumers of all this tech, all these social media apps, but not the creators. Why?
I mean, that's brilliantly put. I mean, simply, look, Black Twitter. I mean, the Black people get a lot of the cultural stuff started on these tech companies. They wouldn't have grown. Twitter wouldn't have grown if it was
And right now, Clubhouse.
and Clubhouse and on Amazon, obviously huge purchases on Facebook. And so the Black community is exactly as you put it. They're the consumers, but more than the consumers, they're the cultural movers. They're getting this stuff popular. I mean, you look at the videos on entertainment and things on Instagram or TikTok. It's often Black entertainers, Black influencers, and yet they're not getting the wealth, the actual wealth creation, and they're not being able to shape these platforms. And that's the huge disjuncture of the digital revolution. I mean, people keep talking about the racial wealth gap, 10-1. It has increased in the last 20 years, not decreased, increased. And one of the big reasons for that, in my view, is that all the wealth creation is largely being driven in the digital economy. So why are they excluded? Have they been excluded? I think partly it's that there's network effects. It's not that they don't want to go into computer science. Actually, young Black kids have a greater desire. There's a study showing they have a greater desire to study computer science than white kids. They're more interested in it. So, and a third of Black graduates in computer science aren't getting jobs in tech, even though there's 700,000 open tech jobs. So part of it is the network effect. I mean, how many of these tech companies are actually recruiting where the talent is? Partly is that they're not getting the skilled boot camp training, which teaches folks not just about the algorithms and how to code, but actually the way that interviews are conducted to get jobs. And then partly is the exclusion of capital. But if this continues, the racial wealth gap 20 years from now will be worse. And what I say is, look, the biggest issue, obviously, and I know, Charlamagne, you've been very eloquent on it, is with criminal justice reform and police violence. And that's obviously people can't be getting shot. But in Silicon Valley, it's easy to sit there and say, the problem is the cop in Minnesota or the cop in Wisconsin, and support Black Lives Matter sort of theoretically and say, okay, we're going to go out and march for greater racial justice against police violence. But what are you doing? Black Lives Matter is not just about making sure Black kids don't get shot in the streets. It's about making sure they have a shot at the American dream and wealth creation. That's a far harder structural reform. And I think we can't let off companies and the area I represent saying, okay, support Black Lives marches without talking about equity and wealth generation.
Why do you talk about generational wealth and all the things? It always seems crazy when we talk about minorities and generational wealth, and then you look at big companies and all the breaks that they get, whether it's the Amazons or the Netflix or all these other companies, and it just seems weird to me that you give all these companies huge breaks, and then when you talk about generational wealth, you don't allow minorities the chance to catch up.
You're absolutely right. I think one of the other reforms should be that there should be people on the boards of these companies. They should have some sense of diversity requirements for the boards and in these companies. And people say, well, why? How does that help someone who's middle class or working class to get representation on the boards? I think that's a very privileged perspective. I mean, it's not just that Black people should be having working class jobs and focused on the minimum wage, so important. We've got to give them access to the wealth generation, and they're going to reinvest that in their own communities. So partly it's diversifying the boards, it's having incentives. As you pointed out, these companies are getting a lot of breaks from the government. They have an obligation to be part of the solution in dealing with the racial wealth gap and the exclusion of Black talent.
Why do you think there's never been an attempt, Ro, to address the racial wealth gap in America in a meaningful way? Or should I say fix the racial wealth gap in America in a meaningful way?
I think that we're not focused enough on the ambitions of young African Americans, African American families. I think we're so focused on the immediate social problems, which are acute. Let's make sure everyone gets health care. Let's make sure everyone, doesn't get shot in the streets. Let's make sure that people have minimum wage. But that's not America. That's not enough. When I go to Claflin, when I talk to these young folks, they have the same dreams as kids in my district. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be business leaders. They want to create wealth. And when do we speak to that aspiration? You're not going to solve the racial wealth gap by just giving everyone health care and minimum wage and Social Security, as important as that is. You've got to give people access to wealth generation. And I just don't think we've been asking that question properly, is where is the wealth being generated and how are we going to give an entire community access? John Lewis, one of the honors I had is serving with him, and he used to say to me, "Rob, technology rights are the new civil rights. Make sure you talk about people having access to technology."
You got to talk to me about this Claflin connection, because I'm from South Carolina. My father-in-law is a Claflin alumni. Like, why Claflin?
So Jim Clyburn, who represents that area,
my guy.
I had gone down to Claflin and we met with some of the students. He had said, "Look, Ro, come." He knew I was keen on getting technology companies to expand, and so he said, "Come down." And we went down to Claflin, and these entrepreneurs, these 20, 22-year-old kids, I mean, unbelievable hunger, ambition, vision, but they didn't have access to the networks. They don't have access to the venture capital. They don't have access to people taking a shot on them. And I was so impressed with Claflin. So I went back and I talked to Zoom, and they were looking to do something. And I said, "Why don't you partner with Claflin?" Now it's a start. I mean, they're putting a couple $1 million. They're actually creating the training programs. They're hiring folks. But what we have to do is ask that of all of the companies, and to do it broadly with the HBCUs, and don't let them get off just writing a check. I mean, that's what happens is these companies will say, "Okay, we'll write a check to the United Negro Scholarship Fund." And then what happens with the money? Maybe some kids get a scholarship. That's great, but they're not getting hired back into tech. They're not becoming entrepreneurs. They're not becoming VCs. They're not getting funded. And I know it's, initially I thought, okay, maybe this is just my perspective from Silicon Valley, but when I go and talk to young kids, a lot of them, this is what they want. Right. They want to make wealth. They want to get successful. They have pride. They have as big dreams as anyone. And I think we sell the dream short when we just talk about the problems and we're not talking about how we're going to give them access to opportunity. Now, Donald Trump, I think, came up with a total, sham, in my view, a superficial thing, platinum plan, and the $500 billion. He wasn't even going to fund it. He was claiming it was going to come through.
It was going to circulate. Yeah, somehow people were going to make money.
But it was rhetorically appealing because he was talking about people making money. That's and right. People having access to it. Now, what we've got to do is say, okay, we're actually going to have the real solutions to how that's going to work. But I think we've got to acknowledge that we've got a real problem in this country. And, look, I'm on the reparations bill and I'm for understanding the historical injustices. But unless we solve the access to future wealth generation, nothing government can do is going to reduce the racial wealth gap if we can't give people the opportunity to create wealth.
By the way, they can figure it out the same way they figured out how to systemically keep us from getting wealth. They can figure out how to get systemically create avenues for us to make wealth. You got the marijuana industry, you got the tech industry.
Look, we've got so much. It's not like the talent is extraordinary. And how do we know this? Because any cultural trend in this country, a lot of it that takes off partly starts with the Black community. The creativity is extraordinary. The ambition is extraordinary. The desire is there. More Black kids want to go into tech than white kids, according to some of the studies. So it's in the interest of these companies to do it. This report showed more diverse companies are more profitable. They better understand consumer needs. So what is stopping it? It is it may not be blatant bigotry, but it's the soft bigotry of your own networks. People don't, they don't know where all the talent is. They don't want to go beyond the people they met at school. They're not willing to make that intentional effort to be inclusive. And I think that's really the problem. It's going to kill us with China. They've got 1 billion people. I mean, how are we going to compete if we're writing off whole parts of our population from AI, from quantum computing, from all of the new fields? And then, think about if all the digital platforms are being created by some people and the Black community is not part of that, how are they going to make sure that their voices are heard and in the design of these platforms?
Can I ask you a question, since all eyes are on elections right now too, and that is a topic of conversation? I just want you to explain, like, from your background, right, running for office, even if you don't win, because there are people who we're very disappointed that they didn't win or whatever. I want you to explain why it can still be a win, even if you don't win that elected office that you were striving to get to, because you yourself have had to go through that. And I want you to explain that and lessons that you can learn and how you can still take that and win an office later.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I lost twice before I won, and of course, Joe Biden lost a couple of times running for president before he won. I think both the losses at the time, it's painful, and it feels like everything you put out there, you spend years, and it's a public embarrassment and a public failure, and everyone knows about it. But both of my losses made me a lot better as a candidate. It made me realize blind spots I had. It made me realize things I had to work on in the community. And at the end of the day, the one thing I think people respect is persistence. I mean, there are people who've lost 3-4 times and they win on their fourth or fifth time. Look at Stacey Abrams. Think if that race was taken from her, and she could have said, okay, I'm going to quit and not do anything else and go make money and do whatever with her great talents. But she sat there and she registered literally the difference in Georgia that may be the reason that Biden and Kamala Harris win. So, I mean, I think loss, if you overcome it, it only makes you stronger.
Absolutely.
Now, I saw what you said, $131 billion in annual venture capital, I guess comes into tech world, but less than 1% goes to Black firms?
Yeah, less than 1% goes to Black entrepreneurs, and even less to Black firms. I mean, it's a small. I mean, it should be a national scandal that the exclusion of that. Think about where all the money is being made. In the S&P 500, 90% of the gain has been the tech over the last 5 years. Where are the billionaires, millionaires coming from? Most of them, a lot of them, Dropbox, Airbnb, Facebook, Google, Apple. How many folks do you know who are Black who said, okay, I had stock options or my company was funded and we IPO'd? How many do you know who were acquired? It is appalling, the level of funding. And the talent is there. There's just no intentionality.
Absolutely.
Has anyone been able to raise the kind of money Rodney Sampson raised in 2000 for their Black tech company? Or was he the last one?
He's one of 20. I think Rodney's great. I mean, with the opportunity, but I think his fund right now is about 5 to 10 million. I mean, there need to be a couple more zeros at the end of that. And what Rodney's doing with Opportunity Hub is amazing work. And Morehouse College, he's set up a boot camp basically where you will get the credentials to have a tech job afterwards. But we've got to give him the money to scale it. I mean, $15 billion properly spent, scaled with boot camps and at HBCUs could get 1 million young Black men and women into these digital opportunities. And then we've got to give them the funding to go out and build wealth. There's a great initiative that Tyrants is doing in Oklahoma. Of course, people know about Tulsa and the Wall Street effort and how that was destroyed by white people who were jealous of basically Black success. They destroyed it twice. I mean, they first had the riots and then they built a highway through Tulsa to destroy it the second time. And so they're trying to build a tech presence there to try to replicate that. But these kind of efforts are going on all over the country. The problem is that there's no funding. There's no effort. And you have such a big platform, obviously, on the Breakfast Club, but I just think saying that this has to be as much of a priority as the other issues facing the community long term, because otherwise there'll never be, I don't think you can have equality without equality of wealth generation. I don't think you can have equality.
Yeah, the civil, no disrespect, but civil rights, no. That's not going to get us where we need to be. And I think that's what Martin Luther King Jr. was pivoting to, like economic empowerment. You know what I mean? Us being financially stable. The civil rights part, they can code racism and hide racism and all types of things. But as long as we got that economic part down packed, I think we'll be all right.
And the economic, yes, I mean, I agree. I mean, obviously, you know this better, but I think the economic empowerment, it can't just be, okay, healthcare and a $15 minimum wage and a good union job. Yes, all of those are important. But is that the country we want to live in? That Silicon Valley gets all the millionaires and billionaires and black folks are on working class and middle class jobs and no wealth creation? Like that is not a true equality, especially when the talent and a lot of the consumerism is being driven by the black community. Their money is going to these companies. Their money, their talent is driving these companies' success. And so I think that the fixes are easy. I mean, I'm hopeful Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris, if they're serious about it, Divine Nine endorsed the approach. So you've got a lot of the fraternities, historical fraternities and sororities behind it. And if you get someone like Rodney, who's really spent a lot of time in this, and a few others to spearhead it, and you give him the resources and you convene the HBCU presidents and you look beyond that, I think you could fix this issue. I mean, and we need to fix it.
Why are you so passionate about it, Ro? Like, why are you so passionate about black people acquiring wealth through tech?
Well, two reasons. One, my own story. So, my grandfather spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi in the 1940s. And I don't know if you know James Lawson, but he's a great leader. He's actually in LA. Lawson actually had gone to India and was influenced by Gandhi's movement, and he went and influenced Dr. King and John Lewis on some of the nonviolent struggles. And if it weren't for the Black Civil Rights Movement, my parents wouldn't have been allowed in this country. In 1965 Immigration Reform Act. Before that, you didn't have Indians or Chinese basically allowed to come to America, and we forget this. And now you got a lot of Indian Americans who have succeeded in technology. They wouldn't have been allowed in America, let alone had those chances. Look at why there's so many Indians at HBCUs, because the other universities didn't hire them. So not only did they come in. So I just think I have an obligation or some responsibility, given this historical circle, to do something to make greater access to wealth generation. It's what I know. It's where I represent. So I mean, there are a lot of other issues, but this is an issue where I can make a difference and give back to a community that made my story possible.
Dope.
Well, Khanna, we appreciate you for checking in and joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so give us more information, Ro. Like, tell us how to reach you, or for people to get in, to find out some of this information that you're talking about. Like, how do we get people involved?
That'd be great. And I'd love people's ideas also, if they have ideas of how to partner with tech companies and what we should be doing. So they can email me at ro@rokhanna.com. I checked that, ro@rokhanna.com. Obviously, they can direct message me if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, or you can reach out to our office. But if you email me with ideas on this, this is a passion of mine and something I want to really work on next 10 years.
All right. Well, thank you so much, brother. We appreciate you for checking in.
Thank you for having me.
See you, King.
Good morning.